built a haunted house for fun, but something inside never wanted us to leave. Every opening night, the power died, like it was warning us. And the night we heard, "Get the fuck out," we ran. But the house wasn't done with us yet. In 1978, the local JCs in St. Albans, Vermont, got together and decided to put together a haunted house as a fundraiser to do around Halloween. Their search for the proper location was rewarded with the old Barlow Street School on the corner of Barlow and Upper Weldon Streets in downtown St. Albans. It was an old 2-story Empire-style school building built around the turn of the century. It still stands to this day. You could go and see it now. You get goosebumps just looking at it. I got involved with the project as I am a special effects makeup artist. For the first couple of years, no one seemed to experience any unusual phenomena, or perhaps weren't willing to share any that they had. Anyway, a couple years into the project, we were working very late one night, which happened quite frequently, as this was being done in a volunteer capacity, and most of the people involved had day jobs. It was a labor of love. So, here we were, myself, the city recreation director and the haunted house director, working in different parts of the building. We had locked the doors, front and back, as a security precaution. I was alone on the top floor, south wing. I had just finished cleaning up in preparation for future set construction. I had just turned out the lights and locked the doors to my area. I began down the front grand staircase. The front staircase is lined with windows, all sides, and juts out from the front of the building, allowing a sight line to the north and south wings in the front. So, from my vantage point on the staircase, I was fortunate enough to suddenly see the lights come back on where I had just been and locked up. Thinking someone was playing a joke on me, I called aloud, "Very funny, guys," and went back upstairs to check. The doors were locked. The lights were out. I shook off a slight shiver and began back down the front stairs, just in time to see the lights come back on again. I called downstairs from where I stood on the center landing to my friends below, working in the north wing ground floor. "Are you sure we're alone in here?" Both their voices chimed back, "Yeah, why?" I looked up at my wing again to see the lights go back out. I replied, "No reason," and kept the incident to myself. On opening night of that year began what became a ghostly ritual every opening night thereafter. 5 minutes before we let the first customers in the door, the building would lose all power. Our electrician would check the system from stem to stern, tell us it was hot, and could find no reason why the power wasn't traveling through the building. 10 minutes later, the power would come back on. So we would open 10 minutes late opening night every year. The building would stay locked up during the winter, and I had worked my way up in the ranks of management of the project. I was sitting in a local pub one night called the Annex and was talking to a girl at the bar. I was telling her some of my haunted house stories. She said she wanted to check it out and that it sounded really cool. Thinking I was going to get lucky with her, I said, "Sure. I've got the keys. Let's face it, nothing will get a girl closer to you than walking around a spooky old building." We went in the back door, and I gave her a tour of the previous year's route through the building. I described the sets to her and what action had taken place in each set. We finally ended up in the basement of the building where we had refurbished everything into a medieval dungeon. We were in the next to last room and about to enter it when she stopped in her tracks and said, "What's in that next room?" I told her that had been the makeup room, and that if we went through there and up a flight of stairs, we could leave out the front door. We stepped into the room, and the both of us were assailed with a deathly chill, and in our minds' ears we heard, "Get the fuck out." Pardon the language, but that's the message I got. I don't even remember how we got there, but we found ourselves standing on the sidewalk in front of the building, gibbering like idiots. We were absolutely bug-eyed with terror. We went back to the annex to brace ourselves with a double. A friend of this young lady's walked up and said, "I swear to God he really said this. You two look like you've seen a ghost." I almost passed my whiskey through my nose. My lady friend told him what had just happened, and he just didn't believe it. Now, determined to prove ourselves honest, we dragged him up there and gave him the tour. This time, when we got to the final room, we walked straight in without pausing. All we found was the dank sensation of a basement. I paused a moment and thought aloud, maybe it only works in twos. I gave them the flashlight and went up the stairs to the front door to wait for them. I no sooner put my hand on the latch, and the two of them came pounding up the stairs behind me. This poor guy had a look on his face like he had been shot through a wind tunnel. "Bad vibes, man. Bad vibes. Get us out of here." I gladly complied. My ex-wife worked with me on the project one year. One night, she said she went to a closet, opened the door, and in the darkness, she could see a little girl sitting in the closet crying. She was wearing clothes from perhaps the turn of the century. The little girl looked up at her and then vanished. She refused to come back into the building after that and refused to talk any further about the incident. Another year, I can't remember which, but as all this pieces together, you'll see it all makes sense. We had a young girl working upstairs in the same section I'd been working in a couple years previously. I was downstairs with some other high school helpers, giving them instructions when we heard this girl's voice upstairs. She was carrying on quite loudly. We went up to see what the problem was. We found her running around the room with a chunk of broken plaster and writing on the chalkboards that were still on the walls, "I am the Janet." We asked her what was up, and she said that a voice had whispered this in her ear. So, now our ghost had a name. It stuck. That following winter, the director of our haunted house, who by the way is a parapsychologist, was visiting with an aunt of his and talking to her about our haunted house projects. She told him that she remembered that building because she used to go to school there as a little girl. She then said, "You know, it's a funny thing. One day we went to school and we hadn't been there an hour, and then they sent us all home. We found out why later. That evening, Father was reading the messenger and said, 'Oh, look, dear, here's why they sent you children home today. It seems your janitor fell ill in the basement and died of a heart attack.' We then remembered what our friend was scribbling feverishly on the chalkboard. Janet. I am the Janet. Janitor. I still get goosebumps whenever I think about this. My director friend asked her where in the basement this happened. She said it was the girl's bathroom. That put our ghost smack in the same room where I was told to get the #% out. We had gutted that whole area prior to moving in and taking over that haunted house, and had forgotten that there was even a bathroom there. Now, my parapsychologist friend began to put the pieces together. After taking readings of the building with the kinetic energy detector, he came up with this theory. The point of origin, that is, where the death occurred, was in the basement in the north wing. Most of our poltergeist activity was now occurring in the north wing, mainly upstairs. You see, in the following years, there was a window in that very room that absolutely refused to stay closed, even when it was nailed shut, even with 9-inch nails. We simply boarded it over and tried to ignore it. This point in the building was the farthest point inside the building from the point of origin. The poor old janitor was trying to get out. To go where? Your guess is as good as mine. There were a lot of other strange occurrences, and I know this story has gone on too far already, so I won't drone on any further. Those were just some of the high points. We closed up the haunted house in 1988, and now I hear they're going to renovate it, if they haven't already, into a teen center of all things. Now, anyone who knows anything about poltergeist activity knows that poltergeists just love children. Things are going to get interesting on Barlow Street. My parents and partner were taking a vacation in Tasmania, which I later found out is renowned for its ghost stories, and decided to stay in a little old cottage that had been converted into a B&B. At first glance, the cottage looked perfect. 2 bedrooms, kitchen, living area, lounge, and bathroom with a jacuzzi, a home away from home. We settled in and I took a tour of the cottage. It all seemed okay until I walked into the children's bedroom, which had 2 single beds and a walk-through to an extension. I felt uncomfortable walking into the room, but dismissed my feelings as being silly. When I walked into the extension, what would have been a perfect little play area for children, I remember thinking, what a good idea. But what I felt was overwhelmingly creepy. My hairs stood on end and I had to get out of there. I wanted to have a jacuzzi and relax before dinner. However, the most uninviting brown muddy water came out of the taps. I thought, it appears this jacuzzi doesn't get much use. I'll let it run for a while till the pipes clear. The pipes didn't clear. In fact, they got worse. By that stage, there were leaves and dead insects coming out. It was disgusting. I got the clear sense that I was not welcome there, so I turned the taps off and decided not to have a jacuzzi. That night, we all went out for dinner before returning to our stone-cold cottage. We decided to go straight to bed and warm ourselves under the covers. My partner and I stayed in the children's bedroom. I took the single bed furthest away from the eerie extension. I remember climbing into the crisp, cool sheets and curling into a ball before falling asleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up feeling hot, boiling hot. I was sweating, my skin was burning, and I was overcome with an overbearing, intense heat. I was delirious and tried to locate the source of the heat. I touched the bed beneath me, and it was like touching an oven door with ineffective gloves on. Why is the bed so hot? I thought, and turned on the bedside lamp to investigate. Under the bed there was a cord leading to the control switch for an electric blanket. It was on 3, the highest setting. That's weird. Who turned the electric blanket on? I asked myself. I became terrified and woke up my partner. Did you turn on my electric blanket? I asked him. No, I didn't know these beds had electric blankets, he replied. Neither did I whispered. Something's turned it on. I'm scared. Can I sleep with you? He nodded. We shared his single bed, and I was able to fall asleep again. In the morning, I asked my mother or father if they played a practical joke by turning on my electric blanket in the middle of the night, but they said no. We immediately packed our bags and left the cottage. I had informed the owner about the dirty water in the jacuzzi incident. He suggested that I was lying by, saying that it was impossible for the jacuzzi to have bad water. He explained that the bathroom was a recent development, only 18 months old, and had been installed with new pipes. He also said that the water source was the same throughout the cottage, and that if dirty water came out of one tap, it would come out of all, which was not the case. Needless to say, that cottage is no longer operating as a B&B. We thought we met an old lumberjack on the lake, until we found his rotting boat half sunken on the shore. The town swore his store was torn down years ago, and no one alive remembers his name. But every time I open my fishing box, it smells of lake water and blood, and those black jigs still aren't mine. It was on the lake when we first encountered the old lumberjack. Laura, my girlfriend, and I were on a fishing trip up north near the small town of Shining Tree, Ontario. There are some excellent small lakes for fishing in the area. During the early morning of the second or third day of our visit, there was a white morning mist coming off the small, calm lake. Laura and I were there on a boat, fishing, when we saw another boat at the other end of the lake and half obscured by the mist. It looked like an old wooden-type 14-footer painted red. A man in the boat wearing a black sweater got up, waved, and sat back down. Laura and I went on casting, but a few minutes later the boat had gone. Thinking that the man might be familiar with the lake and know the good fishing spots, we trolled over to where he had been and cast our lines. This turned out to be a good idea because there was some excellent fishing there. That afternoon we went into town and saw the old man about 100 yards from us crossing the street. He waved again and we waved back. On our way back from town, we noticed a small variety store about halfway between the town and the lake. We stopped and went in. The old man, dressed as before, was at the counter. The man was bald and had a scar running down the top middle of his head. His right hand was missing 4 fingers, leaving only his thumb. He told us that he used to cut lumber in the area. He began telling us some old lumberjack stories, and about how the scar on his head was due to a tree falling on him, as ever bizarre as this sounds. Apparently, he had lost his fingers in a chainsaw accident. He talked about fishing and seeing us on the lake. He offered us some black lead jigs to use for fishing. We bought or got some minnows off him also. I can't remember if we actually paid him any money, and neither can Laura. By that time, it was getting too dark for fishing, but Laura and I went out the next morning. I had earlier put the black jigs in my fishing box, and we started to use them. Then we saw him. The old man was out in his red boat again. Both Laura and I paid little attention while he again vanished. Of course, we thought he had just gone into shore somewhere, perhaps behind some bulrushes there. So we figured on trying to find his location, hoping, perhaps, to use it for fishing at a later time. When we came to the area near the bulrushes, we noticed something red pulled up on shore. It was a wooden boat, like the old man's boat, only this one must have been there for several years and was broken apart and rotting. All this may seem strange enough, but when we later visited the town, on 2 other occasions, we just couldn't find the old man's store again. We asked a shopkeeper in town about the store, and he said that the loggers used to have a small company store in that area, but it had been torn down several years ago. We asked about the old man, but the shopkeeper didn't know him. We never saw the old man again. To finish, I must tell you that I never found any of those black jigs again. They aren't in my fishing box,